Well, thanks everyone for joining this morning. My name is Morton Mosswild. I'm the Director of Forest Policy and Management for the Maine Forest Service. And as you all saw in the notice, this is a briefing to update folks on what's happening with statewide standards for timber harvesting in shoreland areas. And the intention for this presentation, this webinar today, is really just to give an overview of the changes that are coming, describe where we've been, what we're doing now, what the next steps are. It's the beginning of a process where we'll be supplying a whole lot more public information and resources for folks to get into if they need a little bit more detailed information. So again, thanks for the time this morning. As I mentioned, there will be more information forthcoming. So certainly feel free to let us know if you have questions, comments after today. For today's webinar, really what I would like to do again is just give an overview of the process. It's not my intention to get into the details of standards in any great depth. That will be forthcoming from multiple sources a little bit later on. And as most of you know, the Chapter 21, all of the regs and rules that we're responsible for are already on our website. So for today, I think we're going to use the chat function for any questions. I've asked Adam Cates, who's with me also, our field team leader, to monitor the chat. The presentation isn't terribly long. I think I have 14 slides. So we'll probably hold most questions until I'm through the presentation. So just a little bit of background for those of you who perhaps aren't aware. Maine Forest Service is a bureau in the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. So Maine Forest Service, also known as Bureau of Forestry. We have three divisions. You may be familiar with the Forest Protection Division. That's our forest rangers. They deal with wildfire suppression, prevention, and control, information about wildfire, etc. They are also our law enforcement arm. So they deal with a number of laws that they enforce. The Forest Health and Monitoring Division, of course, is our entomologists, disease specialists, also the inventory team that does plots all over the state and collects information on the conditions in the forest. The division that I'm in, the Forest Policy and Management Division, is the third division. It consists of 11 district foresters, Adam, our field team leader. We have 3 regional enforcement coordinators. We also have program and support staff, including our water resources specialist, Tom Gilbert. And our responsibilities are quite broad. We deal with public information, assessing and monitoring and disseminating information about the conditions of Maine forests. We also provide a lot of education, workshops, other opportunities to all kinds of audiences. We provide technical assistance to landowners, loggers, foresters, folks who are working in the field, landowners who need information about what's going on their properties. So really the field foresters are the on-site available folks who can provide direct input, regardless of what the issues are in the woodlands of Maine. The map that you see there, of course, is the 11 district foresters right now, and hopefully many of you had know these folks at firsthand. So we also have a number of regulatory responsibilities within our division. So the natural resource regulations that I've listed here are just the primary ones that we're responsible for. And the book that I show you, the Forestry Rules of Maine, is a great summation of all these rules and many, many others that could pertain to certain aspects of woodlands and forest management in the state. So if you need a copy of that, if you haven't seen that before, we have those available and happy to to get them into your hands one way or the other. Just a quick overview, the rules that we're responsible for in our division are Chapter 20, the Forest Practices Act, which more specifically deals with clear cutting and regeneration standards. The Chapter 21 rules, the statewide standards for timber harvesting in shoreland areas in organized towns. That's, of course, a primary subject of today's webinar. We refer to those as statewide standards, or SWS, just by short, as a means of shorthand. Chapter 23 is the liquidation harvesting rules. Some of you may be familiar with those. Chapter 26, forest operations notifications, which are required notification of timber harvesting activities around the state. And then Chapter 27, which I'll also make reference to in the, which relates to the unorganized and deorganized towns. So we use the chapter numbers sometimes interchangeably with the actual titles. So I hope those aren't too unfamiliar, and if I need to elucidate, let me know. So I just want to go straight to the main points, and I'll provide a bunch more background about these. But I just want to make sure that people understand what we're talking about, what the changes that are or are not coming are. So it's important to know that there are no changes coming to timber harvesting regulations in organized towns. That is not what's happening. There are also no changes directly to the Chapter 21 standards themselves, so those rules will not change. What will change is that the Chapter 21 or statewide standards will become effective in the unorganized territories, what we sometimes call the UT, in January of 2026. And prior to that happening, the Chapter 27 rules, which currently govern the unorganized territories, will be modified so that there's no overlap with Chapter 21. That's really the key information that I hope everybody comes away with today. Now, to go into a little bit more background, how did we get here? We'll start with where we've been, or where we were prior to 2005. And just again, so folks are aware, this is a process that's been ongoing for quite some time, more than a couple of decades. And before 2005, stretching back, a couple decades before that even, timber harvesting was really governed by multiple sets of rules and multiple authorities when it came to operating near water bodies. So folks may be familiar with the mandatory municipal shoreland zoning ordinances. Those are enforced by a local town code enforcement officer in the organized towns. They are related or linked to locally developed shoreland zoning maps, and most of them have or had a timber harvesting component. DEP's Natural Resource Protection Act also has authorities related to timber harvesting, and DEP is and was in that time frame the regulatory authority for those. And then, of course, there's the Land Use Planning Commission, or what at the time was Land Use Regulation Commission rules, governed by LUPSI, or what was then LERC. Maine Forest Service's role prior to 2005 was to assist those other entities with enforcement, but we had no direct authority over the rules themselves. So our role was essentially to conduct site visits, and where we identified regulatory issues, to refer those to, in some cases, DEP, or to LUPSI or LERC, which are both agencies with limited field staff and many other responsibilities other than timber harvesting. Our interactions with towns also were similar in that we would conduct site visits. We would identify regulatory issues that might fall under a local ordinance and refer those to a local code enforcement officer who would have the any kind of enforcement or regulatory role. That was the condition prior to 2005. The steps that led to 2005 really began, to the statewide standards in 2005 really began in 1999 with the beginnings of a couple of different sources of legislative direction. And the goal that was identified by the legislature and also by a pretty broad group of stakeholders, really input from multiple quarters. The goals were to develop a single set of regulatory standards to replace this overlapping suite of rules, to have them apply throughout the state, and also to establish a single regulatory authority to be more efficient. And in this case, for timber harvesting, that would be the Maine Forest Service. So again, the goals there are really to have a much reduction or elimination of overlap in those jurisdictions, to make it easier for people to know how to get information, to reduce some of the complexity and the confusion that resulted from these overlapping regulations, to make it easier to get information to folks and really streamline that information flow, and overall really to improve compliance with those rules, ultimately to protect the water resources that are so important to the state of Maine. In that time frame from 1999 to 2005, there was a process that took place with many different stakeholders from all quarters of the forest community. That group came up with the direction and the content of the statewide standards. And so it was a collective consensus-based effort that has led us, or that led us to the statewide standards themselves. So what that set in motion was that in the ensuing years, DEP and LUPC both delegated their authorities for timber harvesting to Maine Forest Service. That occurred right in statute and also embodied in rules. The statewide standards rules were finalized, and the towns, organized towns, were given an option. It was not a mandate, but they were given an option to adopt statewide standards in lieu of the shoreland zoning provisions for timber harvesting. So essentially, Maine Forest Service took on responsibility for the timber harvesting portions of their local ordinance as long as they had adopted statewide standards. There was no impact and is no impact to any other local regulations, including clearing for development. Those activities are still regulated by the towns and in some instances also by DEP. And really, it unburdened towns from that responsibility and from the cost of trying to work with timber harvesting in the context of their own ordinances. So that has been really the result of that long-standing or long-term process of developing and establishing the statewide standards. Which brings us to where we are today. So this map shows you what rules apply where as relates to shoreland areas. The blue towns that you see in this map are the Chapter 21 towns. Those are all the organized towns that have adopted the statewide standards through their local ordinance adoption mechanisms. So there are quite a few towns that are now statewide standards towns. The Chapter 27 towns are in yellow. Those are the unorganized territories, and they fall under this Chapter 27 rule currently. And in white are those towns that have not adopted statewide standards, and those towns still have their local shoreline zoning ordinances with the timber harvesting provisions still embedded, and also fall under directly under the DEP rules. And so the change that we're embarking upon right now is that by statute, the statewide standards will take effect in the organized towns. And what the original statute and the rules contemplated was that that would not happen until a so-called critical mass of organized towns had adopted statewide standards. The intention there was to ensure that enough of the organized towns were under the statewide standards before the unorganized territories came under that same rule. So that's the change that is happening in now and in the coming months. So to put this on a little bit more detailed timeline, that critical mass has now been reached. The commissioner made that determination just a couple of months ago, notified the Secretary of State, again, as was contemplated in statute. And so the statewide standards go into effect in all unorganized towns. And the effective date, again, as is outlined in statute, is January 2nd of 2026. And the reason for that is, as described, as spelled out, the rules take effect in those unorganized towns 1 full calendar year after the year in which critical mass is reached. The reason for that really is to provide a transition time for the entities in the unorganized towns to adjust, to learn, and for us to do the outreach that it takes to make sure that people understand what the Chapter 21 rules entail. Again, I'll just underline that municipalities that have adopted statewide standards won't change because there is no change in the Chapter 21 rules themselves. It's also the case that there is still no mandate for organized towns to adopt statewide standards. So those towns will be able to retain their own local ordinances if they choose. They can also choose to adopt the statewide standards through the same process that other towns have already been through. A couple other things that will be happening is that Chapter 27, which currently does address water bodies, will be revised in the coming months and into the first part of next year to remove any overlap with statewide standards so that there's no redundancy and there's no conflict between those rules. The Chapter 21 rules then go into effect without any kind of revision in January of 26. And it's also important to note that the statewide standards rules still maintain some small differences between the unorganized and organized territories. So even within the statewide standards, the rules are not perfectly identical, but they are very, very closely aligned, and 98% of the rules are exactly the same. Our task, our intention is to provide, again, a whole lot more outreach and education so that the regulated community, particularly forest landowners, loggers, and foresters, and others with interests, will be able to understand and apply the statewide standards once they go into effect. And that's a task for the remainder of 2024 and all of 2025. I just want to underline that the reasons that we are doing this is essentially that the process that was contemplated in statute and has been in place and was the subject of this longstanding agreement, that process has now reached its logical next step. So the statutory trigger of critical mass has been pulled. And really the original objectives of having a single standard that applies statewide, with the exception of probably a few local towns will continue to retain their ordinance. But that single set of standards allows for better information flow, training, and education, less room for confusion, a single source to get information about what rules apply. The statewide standards maps are advisory, but they are a little bit more straightforward in some respects and a little bit easier to access. Ultimately, what we're looking for is improved compliance, equitable enforcement across the state, and really improvement in the protection of water quality. Again, Chapter 21 is very similar to Chapter 27. There will be an increase in protections and restrictions in a few areas. For example, non-forested wetlands and a few of the smaller streams. I'd really encourage you to go to the website, the webpage that we've created that will outline a lot of this in greater detail. So just to recap, the determination of critical mass has occurred. We're beginning that flow of information with the webpage devoted to this transition that also provides some of the background. Previous workshops on Chapter 21, the statewide standards rules, are available online. There's a video recording of one of those workshops. In the near future, we'll be offering additional workshops and webinars to go into the standards themselves and outline what those are and how to understand the transitions that are happening. We have a frequently asked questions document that's also on the website. So we're doing our best to get as much information out there as we can. And again, welcome your questions as time goes on to try to make sure that people understand what is happening, how it's happening, and how it'll affect their operations. That, of course, will continue into 2025 with a great deal more information, and anyone who has requests for a particular resource or a webinar or a workshop in a particular area, please let us know so that we can make sure that we're getting the information to the folks who need it. And then in 2026, the statewide standards take effect in the unorganized territories, and it's a fairly smooth transition. One thing to be aware of is that it's, as has been contemplated in rule, operations where the forest operations notification has been submitted and the harvesting is already in progress prior to the 1st of January or 2nd of January in 2026, they can continue to operate those areas under the old rules if they so choose. So the transition, we're trying to make that as smooth as possible and the least possible disruption to people's operations. That's really all I have for this morning. Again, Adam has put a couple of the key information pieces into the chat, so you can access those there. You're certainly welcome to call us, email questions to forestinfo@maine.gov. Call us. I'll be available to answer questions, Adam as well, and our field staff as well. So certainly let us know what questions you have, and we'll be doing our best to keep folks informed over the coming months as this transition occurs. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to check in with Adam as to whether there are questions in the chat right now. And again, thanks everyone for attending, and let us know what questions you have as we begin this process.
Right now, Mort, I see no questions in the chat.
Okay. I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes if questions arise. But once again, thank you for attending. Let us know what questions you have, and by all means, be in touch. Thanks all for being here this morning. Again, if there are no more questions, feel free to drop off, and feel free to drop us a line as well. Thanks, everyone. So I'm going to close the webinar now. Thanks again, everyone. See you all soon.